So welcome to this meeting of the Russian Studies Seminar Series here at CEAS. We're really happy to have been able to invite Emil Draitser here to speak about his latest book, In the Jaws of the Crocodile. I've known of Emil's work, and we've corresponded for many years, in particular his work on the Soviet jokes and Soviet and Russian jokes, which was very important to my own work on the same topic. In addition to his work in those two books on ethnic humor, Russian ethnic humor, and gender and sexuality in Russian humor, he published one of the best known collections of then underground jokes, anekdoti, in the Soviet Union in 1980, Forbidden Laughter, which was a very influential book and introduced that genre to a lot of people in the United States and outside of Russia. He is also a professor at Hunter College and has published lots of scholarly works, including a monograph on the 19th century satirist Saltykov-Shchedrin. He's published several memoirs, including the memorably titled Shush, Growing Up Jewish Under Stalin, a memoir. And Jaws of the Crocodile is actually one of two sequels to that book. The other one is Farewell, Mama, Odessa. So just a little bit about his biography. He was born in Odessa, Ukraine, to a working class Jewish family. And he began writing as a freelancer under a pen name, Emil Abramov, and contributed satirical articles to such periodicals as the Literary Gazette, Literaturna Gazeta, Izvestia, Yunost, and Crocodile, which is the best known Soviet satirical newspaper, which is the subject of his book. He got in trouble for criticizing an important official and left the Soviet Union for the United States in 1975. And as I said, since he earned a PhD from UCLA, and since 1986 has been a professor of Russian at Hunter College in New York City. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Emil.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad for the opportunity to share my background, my knowledge of the subject matter, because for about 10 years I was part of Soviet satirical scene. So I would like to talk about it using some visual parts that would give you a better idea what the Soviet satire used to be. So in, let me share it with you. So in my book, actually, which already thought that it starts shortly after the end of the first book, Shush. It means we're talking about September 1953. It's in the March of that year, Stalin died. So there was a kind of at least an expectation that things will change in the country. And of course, today I'm not will stress so much my autobiographical aspect of it as the subject matter that is the core of my book. So first of all, obviously the question would come, is the term Soviet satire a contradiction in terms? I remember my son, who was just 1 year old when we left the Soviet Union, he asked me this kind of a question. He said, listen, I know you have been writing satire in the Soviet Union. Is it not contradiction in terms? So that's, I understand, the viewpoint of many, at least Americans who are not familiar with this kind of a obscure term. So I just wanted to demonstrate how popular the satire was in the Soviet Union, to compare it with American, let's say, satirical magazine. For example, National Lampoon. It is known that at its peak, National Lampoon was published in October 1974, 1 million copies in a month. Now, Mad Magazine, again, the peak comes in October 1974, the same, I believe it's connected with the Watergate scandal, 2 million copies a month. Now we're talking about Crocodile. It was published all the way from its origin in 1922, all the way to the end of the Soviet regime. And that it came out every 10 days, 6.5 million copies. In other words, around 20 million monthly. Obviously, you understand, totally state-controlled publication with such a tremendous amount of copies. Now, besides that, starting in 1961, the Mosfilm produced the satirical magazine The Week, Fitil, that comes from Russian word fitil, means to, stavit fitil means to have a good workout for somebody who is misbehaving on things like that. And it was tremendously popular. It was usually shown in, before major feature in the movie theaters, they would show this short satirical journal. Besides, there have been probably all major newspapers in the Soviet Union published satirical columns called feuilleton. They use the French word. But feuilleton was, although I know the French origin not necessarily has a satirical connotation, in the Soviet usage of that time, it was feuilleton meant satirical feuilleton, means satirical column. So when it comes from? Well, it came from no other than Joseph Stalin. In 1952, in Malenkov's speech, he quoted Stalin, we need our Soviet goggles and Saltykov-Shchedrins, means we need satirists in this country. So why? Okay, just to sum it up in one phrase is the following: to fight separate shortcomings that obstruct our movement to the shining heights of communism. Separate shortcoming, okay? Now, what were the targets of the state-sponsored satire? First of all, rank and file employees. For example, poor work discipline, which means, for example, taking long smoke breaks, going to lunch and not coming on time, wasting working time, okay? Or the poor workmanship, poor quality of goods for the population. And here in this cartoon is the quality control inspector is fighting with the director of for where to really put the stamp of approval that's really a good quality, okay? Now, theft at workplace. It was a tremendous, because of the salaries in the Soviet time were so meager that hardly anyone could survive on salary alone. So the theft was really a national phenomena. And so this cartoon is about, obviously, it's a play on Russian expression, парень грудь колесом, means, well, usually it's a bogatyr, means a strong fellow. But what is really known for what is in the mentality of people like that, they would say, hey, after all, isn't it everything in this country belongs to working people? So I'm just taking my part. And that's about it. That was the excuse. Cheating in the stores. Well, anyone who lived in Soviet Union know that you have to watch, because they will always обвешивать, the Russian term, of course, means not really you're paying for much more than you're getting. So that's all. Again, if it's the subject matter on the cover of the Crocodile, that means this is the main big issue that is at a particular time is bothering those who publish the Central Committee of Communist Party. Because Crocodile, again, I may not mention, Crocodile was the organ of the Central Committee of Communist Party. That means nothing there would appear without its approval. So now, also besides rank and file, low and mid-level management and administration was part of the satirical targets. For what? For example, here we're talking about bureaucratic merry-go-round. So bureaucracy is not exclusively in capitalist countries. It's a worldwide phenomena. So obviously that crocodile is a subject. Now, bribery also. In Russian everyday life, you would say "не подмажешь, не поедешь." In other words, if you don't really lubricate, you won't go any much far. Also fraud, reporting things that are just oftentimes for political reasons, oftentimes, sometimes, and at the same time to get bonuses. For example, here, one of the, let's say, officials says to the combiner, "What's with you? Haven't you read our report? We're already taking care of this harvest." Means they already reported, that's already done. Why are you doing it? Obviously, making fun of it. Also, cooking the books to get bonuses. Again, in order to get bonuses, and bonus was the only thing that could supplement these meager salaries. That's, I think, it's clear. Mismanagement, especially it was prevalent in the time when I was working in the field, is the attitude toward new technology. There was a lot of new technology was purchased, a lot of even coming from the West, but it was poorly implemented. There was not really much interest in it, in the way economy was running. So I found a good use for new technology. Means obviously it's making fun of, that's the only way he can utilize this. Usually this technology was bought for hard currency, but it was always kind of in short supply. Industrial pollution, well, that's self-explained, right, to avoid any sanitary control. Shortages. Now, things change a bit in time of perestroika and glasnost. You see, this year is 88. And that's only, at that time, you could generalize on the following subject matter. It's, you see, middle of an operation, scalpel. Okay, somebody, obviously the surgeon called for. And the reply is, well, they promised to deliver it in the third quarter of the year. Okay, I think the message is clear. Also, poor medical service for population. Also, the time primarily of the end of the Soviet regime, at time of Gorbachev. So the punchline reads, yes, the man you ask about used to live here a year ago. May his soul rest in peace. It took them quite a while to come to help him. Abuse of power of the office. That's also for the middle and low management. Rudeness and high-headedness. To shout at your subordinate was part of many of this level of bosses that they use. To shout, to be rude. Now, this one, little wolf. Well, if if you fail me now, my daddy will eat you alive. The implication, of course, that the wolf is the obviously on the upper end of the what they call it, eating chain, something like that. Yeah. Also, which one? This one is, which of the secretaries should I let go? See, one and young and sexy and doing nothing, or middle-aged who is just working. Again, making fun of this, of that kind of a thing. Passing the buck. This is something that not only this Soviet time kind of a phenomena, but it's going back to, usually the expression would be in Russian, во всем виноват стрелочник, which means it's all amounts to a switchman's fault. Where it comes from? It comes from 19th century. when the railroads started to be spread in the Russian Empire. And if something will go wrong, none of the officials of higher ups would take responsibility. They would say, "Oh, it's not. It's just the switchman did the wrong thing. That's why we had this this train accident and so on." So that's, but that what became, we repeat, I remember in Soviet time, we would say, "Oh, of course, it's the case, somebody else is at fault, the little people are at fault, not we, not the bosses." And then again, criticism against satire on using your power to suppress any criticism. "Yesterday, some rabbit dared to criticize me. Get it here at once. Here it comes. Already know what to do, how to please the boss." And of course, for general population, antisocial behavior, for obviously drunkenness. And here comes a pun that obviously, if you, for anyone who knows Russian would appreciate, "Sama upitsa," not "sama ubitsa," which means obviously suicide victim, but "sama upitsa" means you're basically committing suicide by drinking. And antisocial behavior of the youth who at night doesn't, is really doesn't care much about giving quiet for people around them. Now, what I have discovered while doing research, already working on this book, that really shattered my understanding of what was the field I was working on back in the Soviet Union. It turned out to be in the work of our colleague, Irina Pavlova, who is now, I believe she's in one of the Boston colleges, universities. She discovered the following, and which I include in the book, that the hidden task of the open criticism of economic targets is to create a false facade to hide true military capabilities. So she found that in 1930s, Joseph Stalin gave the following advice to his minister, Lazar Kaganovich, who was in charge of railroads, of industrial. So I found some pictures of Stalin at that time and Kaganovich. So he would say to him, "Listen, why wouldn't you put in newspapers as much as possible criticism of our mismanagement, lack of order in the industry?" No, of course, we have all of this, but do it. So Kaganovich asked, "With photographs?" To which Stalin replied, "Well, why not? In our position, a subtle policy is needed. You can't win if you don't cheat." What he meant by this is to hide the true military capabilities of the Soviet Union at the time. So that's, I think the attitude of Stalin in this picture is quite clear, okay? You can't win if you don't cheat. So what were the nonos of Soviet satire? First of all faults of the socialist economy had to be shown as being local and sporadic, not systemic. In other words, you can criticize, and probably I'll give you some example later on, a particular factory that is producing a faulty, bad quality of shoes or whatever other item of consumer goods. But you cannot anyway even to hint that the whole system is not working. The whole system of centrally planned economy is not working. So secondly, no party apparatus is to be criticized by any paper other than Pravda, because it's the instrument of the party central committee. Thirdly, no making fun of Soviet foreign policy, for God's sakes. Crocodile had a special, at the last pages of Crocodile was usually was for the foreign satire on foreign subject, but obviously it's not, by all means, it was all about the Wall Street, about British misbehaving in the world, about West Germany, but nothing at all about, obviously, about the Soviet policy. And then when I was talking my own experience and talking to my colleagues in the field, there was some territorial blockage from any criticism, even if it was a kind of a minor thing that usually would allow us to write about it, right? You cannot, because in Brezhnev time, for example, two Moscow regions, Bauman and Perov, where you cannot publish anything about it, even in a local paper, because it turned out to be that the bosses of that region were personal friends of Brezhnev. So obviously you don't want by any chance to do anything about it. So so what happens if a journalist oversteps the boundaries of permitted of inadvertently? So depending on the gravity of his or her mistake, either reprimand or firing, or the editor-in-chief will be summoned to the Bureau of Propaganda Central Party Committee where he tried. This happened to me, but a little bit later, I'll tell what happened in my case particularly. That the editor-in-chief tried to defend his publication because after all, that was the final word of it. But sometimes it helps, sometimes not. Well, I just briefly will talk about my my personal experience. Of course, in the book, I go to much great extent, even to explain why I found myself in this field, although I never thought of doing anything like that, like satirical. I wanted to be a writer, but not satire. It never crossed my mind to do it. But well, I may as well to tell you why. I brought some lyrical short story to Moscow newspaper, Moskovsky Komsomolets, Moscow Komsomol member. And so he read it and he said, yeah, I like it, everything is fine. But you have some kind of accent. What we need, where are you from? And that was Moscow. I said, I'm from Odessa. Oh, не морочьте голову, напишите нам филетон. Means, oh, what are you talking about? You have to write a satirical piece for us. Why? Because Odessa had a reputation from the whole time immemorial, so to speak, of being a city of the unofficial capital of humor in the USSR. We can go into details why if you will be interested in our question answer. There are many reasons for that. So for me, it was an opportunity to see my name in print finally. So they gave me a letter. The way usually satire worked, and how I work, the editor would give you a letter from one of the readers that they would send to a newspaper, telling what kind of a bad things happening. A newspaper should hit them hard. In other words, he gave me a letter from a woman who wrote that she wanted to buy ounces for her baby boy, and it was such a poor quality. So the only thing I came up with that I wrote working on this, obviously I made a phone call to verify it all, and I wrote a piece something to that extent that this young lady comes to a store and asks her to buy these ounces, polzunki in Russian we call it, right? And so that the sales clerk says, listen, tell me about your baby. Is he, what kind of a character he has? Is he sanguinic or melancholic? Is he, in other words, moving from a lot or not, or he's quiet baby? And she said, what's the difference? Well, we have only what this once is for quiet babies. If your baby is really energetic, it would not hold for too long. But she bought it, and that's kind of you make a joke about that kind of a situation. But again, you have to be specific. That ounces produced by such and such factory. You understand? You cannot say, hey, this economic system cannot produce good consumer goods. So that's shortly after I found that there was a shortage of people who can write that kind of things, and I was invited to contribute to CROCODILE that gave me kind of this crocodile ID, that its power was next to the KGB, excuse me. In what sense? Of course, I didn't arrest anyone. But if you come to a provincial city in the Soviet Union and you're from Crocodile, they'll try to please you because nobody wants to wind up to be criticized on the pages. In what sense? Just a simple reason, to find a room in a hotel. That's about it. You don't want, I never, nobody never used it for any other purpose. And otherwise it would be very difficult to find it, but they would find it if you're Crocodile, correspondent from Crocodile. So it all came for about, what, 6-7 years I was doing for Crocodile, and also for Izvestia, for Komsomol Pravda, for many other central papers, writing feuilletons and short satirical. In 1971, I was on business trip to Belgorod, and I saw a play produced by local theater, and it was horrific and it's so poor of its poor taste. So I came back and I wrote a satirical column, which is like a spoof. You see, this is the whole thing was published. Sclerotic zakroy rotic means that's a line from this play. It already tells you what kind of a level of play it was. Shut up, scatterbrain. That's the translation. So, but what I did not know, and the editor-in-chief didn't know, you understand it, that there are so many levels until the piece is approved for publication. Nobody knew that between the time I submitted this piece and the time it was published, it passed like 2 months. The author of this play turned out to be editor-in-chief of the magazine Theater. And therefore, he was the appointee by the Minister of Culture. That means he was in we talked about, I wish we had who and who book, so we'll know who you can touch, who you cannot. In this case, nobody knew, obviously, in the editor-in-chief. So that was a tremendous scandal, of course. And the editor-in-chief of the magazine was called to the Central Committee, to the Bureau of Propaganda. Then they organized a denunciation of the literary gazette by somebody else. That how come you're such a honorable playwright was criticized? It's not true. The play is not that bad, and all of this business. So that's they had to cut me off officially from the contributing to the Crocodile. And at that time I thought of it, well, maybe it's enough is enough. However, luckily, already it started to be in the in some Soviet press, central press, a new tendency of new ways of new and obviously old. If anyone who studied 19th century Russian literature knows Aesopian satire came into being. It was used by Saltykov, Shchedrin, and some other satirists in their time. What does it mean? It's to write satire between the lines, to make sure that you cannot be accused that you directly attacked one or other untouchable, write something about an untouchable subject. So this was done primarily by literary gazette. They opened the 12 Chairs Club. Obviously, the title of is the 12 Chairs, the title of a famous Soviet satirical novel. So this is their logo. And basically, they portrayed themselves or positioned themselves as just the last page, okay, 16, the last page, a humorous kind of just pure humor, nothing else, okay? And I wanted to give you an example of that kind of ways of avoiding censorship. They had a rubric, children's room. That means this is just poems for children. In Russian, если нужен апельсин, вы зайдите в магазин и купите пластилин и слепите апельсин. Why? Because there's a tremendous shortage of oranges in the country. So if you want an orange kit, if you truly have this need, get a Play-Doh in a store. Make an orange or make more. Clear enough, right? Now, another one, soup. again, about scarcity of food in the population, that если в миске мало супа, вам нужна большая лупа. Поглядите в эту лупу, будет много-много супу. English, if your bowl is scarce of soup, get yourself a bigger loop. Now, looking through that loop, you will see a lot of soup. It's just for children, just to play. Now, and probably the most amazing piece of satire at that time was this a short story, which I will retell it, by Andrei Kuchai, one of the satirical writers, that was published in the Literary Gazette under the title Monument, a monument. And it seemed to be, on the surface of it, just another story, which was a lot in different newspapers so at that time, to make fun of alcoholics. So what this story is about, I will just retell it. Obviously, I go to more at length in my book. So at night, it's winter, it's snowing, it's very cold, and an alcoholic is trying to catch a taxi on one of the Moscow streets. And it's very, very difficult. And he sees near him, there was another poor fellow like him stretching his hand, trying to get a taxi. So he feels kind of sympathy for him. He comes to him, he grabs him. Oh, the man is very heavy. It's probably totally frozen. He takes him, and in his drunken haze, he takes him home, puts him in another bed, and falls asleep. In the morning, he wakes up, and he found that he pulled a statue from pedestal. Seemingly big deal. Tremendous scandal, especially from the old Bolsheviks, so to speak. Why? Because it was for anybody in the Soviet Union clear that this is a satire on Lenin's monuments around the country. They're all with this outstretched hand. So in other words, the implication of this satirical piece, what Lenin was not calling toward going to communism. He's just trying to catch a taxi. So along the same lines, I also published a few pieces, one of them in Literary Gazette, which is here, a mug of kvass. Again, in the book, I have the whole text of it. I here try to just simply to retell briefly the piece. Is a hot, sunny day in Moscow, and they sell kvass. Means kvass is a fermented drink, something well, tremendously popular in the Soviet Union, made of breadcrumbs, probably as popular as Coca-Cola in America. So, and it was sold summertime on the streets from this, as you see, with a big tank of kvass. So the seller tells the kvass, and people are coming and coming. Then more people are coming. So he said, stop. The seller says, oh, stop the line, because I'm about to end. There's not enough for everyone. And somebody suggested, you know what? Why wouldn't you add a little bit of water so that will be enough for everybody? So you don't mind? No, well, what you will be paying for basically for kvass, although the little part of it will be water. It's unheard of. So, well, come on, it's a lot of things like that happen already. So he started pulling water, but people are coming and coming. Okay, and eventually it's pure water already. There's no more kvass, and the line is coming up. So finally, the inspector the city inspector comes, and comes his turn. So he's obviously the seller is frightened what happened to him, but after the inspector drank this pure water, actually, he said to him, the main thing, Petrovich, the inspector said after gulping down his mug of water, don't shortchange people. Pour everyone the same amount. So in other words, it turns out to be a satire on people who accept equality of being poor. Means, yeah, we have nothing, but at least it equally. that kind of. Now I have some example of the visual Aesopian satire. For example, this one. Let me see. I can go back. Okay, so you see the two fellows, obviously, satire, obviously the objective is a lack of food for population. Kolya, wait, now they will show us some snacks on television, okay? Or it said burgers, meat pastries, and rib steaks for rent. Seems to be just humor, right? Or a woman says, you have misunderstood me. I want some human warmth. This one, it's easy to see. This is a censorship of artistic work. Pegasus as a symbol of art, right? Of artistry, tied up. Or this one that I especially like. Again, humor, right? Yet everyone who lived at that time, at least, would understand it. Foreign travel under the KGB supervision. Yes, actually, I can remember there was one underground joke like that, that a group of tourists are coming to Paris, and one man asked, tell us, does anybody know how in French ask, I would like to defect? So immediately a man came out, from the group, stood up and said, what do you mean? That's what you have in your mind? To he said, no, I just wanted to know who is responsible for the group. Okay, in other words, it was always implanted some KGB supervisor, somebody who would take care of, be sure that nobody defects. And this one, I think I like especially, and I'll give you a minute to think about it. Just think about it, how elaborate is the Aesopian language. Okay, pay attention. This is north, in Russian, sever, and this is yug, south, which means this part is what? East, right? And who is this guy? Anybody who lives in the Soviet Union recognizes Stalin. So the message is encrypted here. Stalinism is on the rise. Again, it's hard to understand it living outside of the culture in which, or the time when it was happened. But at that time was very clear. That was the message, okay? Well, that's about all what I wanted to briefly tell about this satire. I probably would want to add some personal, some people ask you, well, you work in that kind of some kind of a risky field. Did you ever run into KGB? So I had 3 encounters with KGB. One friendly, one intimidating, and one mysterious. I would like to just to show you how it happened. So back in September 1973, means it's more around a year before I immigrated from the country. At that time, I did not even think about it. I received a phone call from my father-in-law who said, listen, one of my clients would like to talk to you. And, you know, I was surprised. I was not surprised. I was not surprised because, well, since I was a satirical writer, columnist, I mean, feuilleton, people sometimes call, say, listen, something happened at our place, maybe you can write about it. So that was not surprise. The surprise was that my father-in-law worked as a tailor in tailor shop of the Ministry of Defense. So I thought of it, nothing about defense obviously was, could you ever write in the papers about military? So why? I was simply intrigued. He said, listen, this man, that's his stuff. Well, he asked you if you want to call. I called with very cultured voice of the man invited me to come over. I came over. That's how he looked like. Later on, I obtained his picture. So first thing here, obviously, that's how I looked at that time. And he asked me to show my Union of Journalists ID, which I presented him. And we sat, and he, for the duration of the evening, told me about his life story. And I could not believe what I heard. Not because I didn't trust, I felt he's lying, absolutely not, just the opposite. Because whatever he told me, it was practically impossible to write even a line in the Soviet press at that time. And I couldn't understand. To begin with, I was a satirical writer, so why would I call, what is his background? Like this background, and he told me briefly his story, that as a young man, he wound up to be as an emigre in Turkey after the end of Civil War. Then he, with the rest of the immigrants, he came to Prague, and there he was drafted by the KGB because he wanted to come back home, but they said, okay, you have to deserve it. You have to do something for the motherland. So, and he spied for the Soviet Union from 1925 all the way to 1936, when he very successful with many operations, which in a moment I'll tell you what I did with this information, and then he came back only to be arrested shortly, and he spent in Gulag 16 years, and he told me about the torture that he went through and so on. I could not understand why he's telling me. So I came home, and here's the photocopy of my notebook at that time. I wrote down, and if you see, everything was in ink, but his last name, Bystrolyotov, I wrote in pencil. The year was 1973. It was kind of a scary time because at that year in February, I believe, Solzhenitsyn was expelled from the country. It was not a time to mess with never time to mess with KGB, but definitely I said, just in case if something happened, at least I will erase his name. So many years later, already coming to America, almost 20 years ago, by chance I learned that the man to whom I talked to was one of the star spies of the for the Soviets in the 20s and the 30s, and his name is known in the West. And since I had a meeting with him, I knew him personally, I was offered to do his biography, and that's what I did. So it came out in 2010, this book, Stalin's Romeo Spy, The Remarkable Rise and Fall of the KGB Most Daring Operative, okay? So the book came out Northwestern University Press. It came out then in paperback in Great Britain by Duckworth Publishers. It was translated into Polish. And then it turned out to be that the new spy museum in Washington, D.C., International Spy Museum, Washington, D.C., they learned and they invited me to talk about him. So I gave a talk there. That's one of the slides of the talk about him and his work. And now, if any of you will visit the International Spy Museum, on the main floor, and I visited year before pandemic, of course, two main figures, should I say, superstars of all time, is Mata Hari and Dmitry Bystrolyotov, the two stellas about them with videos telling about his life. So that's actually my friendly encounter. Now we're talking about intimidating the encounter. In September 1974, I finally received permission to immigrate. And I was told that actually you could, always, over the years, obviously a number of pieces that I wrote, just I kept for myself because they couldn't be published or for some other reason. And I thought that taking them along, but I knew that the customs would not allow it. They would demand that you go to the Globlit, the central censorship organization. They would read it, put a stamp on every step. I wanted to avoid it, and I heard that among people who are about to immigrate, that if you go to the Dutch embassy in Moscow, why Dutch embassy? Because officially we could only leave under the Israel visa. And since there was no diplomatic relations between Soviet Union and Israel at that time, Dutch embassy stepped in and helped in that matter. So this is the yard of the Dutch embassy in Moscow. And at that time I came, it was a long, long line of people like me coming for visas, coming from all kinds of. And as I was standing in line, some men next to me start to kind of banter. Well, how are you? What are you going? Anyway, he asked me what I'm for, and I told him I did not feel that I have anything on me to be incriminated for anything. I didn't pay much attention to it. Nevertheless, the moment I said that I was a journalist, want to get someone, this man motioned the policeman the entrance of the embassy, and I was detained for 3 hours. They took me out from line, put me in a separate room. I describe it in a separate chapter, to try to see what I wanted to smuggle out of the Soviet Union. As later on I understood, it was nothing to do with me personally. They wanted to prevent kind of letters of protest that were signed to be taken out of the country and so on. So it was not the 3 best hours of my time, trust me, waiting until KGB officer will come and examine it. Yeah, so it was nearby. Here's the Dutch embassy, and I was taking Nikitsky Boulevard nearby, if you know the area. And now, and finally, a mysterious encounter with the KGB was on the day of my immigration, October 8, 1974. And again, out of sheer difficulty to leave behind things that to which I was emotionally attached, my clippings of my publications that I had. And so I made like 2 big scrapbooks. And so when I was trying to get out of it in Sheremetyevo airport, I mean, just before boarding, so the custom officers motioned somebody, and anyway, KGB officer came out and started looking through all of this, my clippings. And I was amazed, but this is how one of the pages that he, some of the publications, he simply grabbed like that and threw it in the wastebasket. He didn't allow. And it was a mystery to me why he kept some of them and why other he felt that he cannot pass by. I don't know whether I should leave it at like a cliffhanger, because I explained all of this in the last paragraph of my book. Why did it happen? But otherwise, yeah. And so as I already said my continuation with my satirical past was because I did something. I wrote about techniques of satire, examining Saltykov-Shchedrin, the great Russian satirist of 19th century. This is the cover of the book that Seth mentioned already, of the collection, the first collection of Soviet underground jokes in 2 languages. And that was obviously, by that time, it was kind of introduced, so to speak, the Western world to that phenomena. And I did also the study of Making War Not Love, of gender and sexuality in Russian humor. I began examining the jokes. And my other scholarly work is Taking Penguins to the Movies, which is ethnic humor in Russia, in which, in part, I have also a separate chapter on. It's not only jokes that the Russian told about other nationalities, but it also includes Jewish jokes that was part of the what should I say, conversation within the Jewish group, because at the time there was not official representation of Jewish groups. So these jokes actually were kind of a virtual community. Means they created certain mood. They addressed some issues that were important at that time. So that's about it. What I can tell you briefly, and I'll be happy to answer your questions if you have some.
Thank you very much, Emil. And unfortunately, there's no applause at this moment. At this point, we would all applaud, but we can't do that on Zoom. If anyone does have a question, you can either put it in the chat, or can you raise your hand in Zoom? I can't remember. Does anyone have any questions for Emil? Elizabeth?
Microphone. Her microphone is.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
My question was about the crocodile. Did people, I'm assuming people could not subscribe to this, that they had to buy issues singly on the newsstand?
No, they could.
Because they would not want to be known. Is that not true?
No. Crocodile is
Crocodile was sanctioned.
Sanctioned, approved, so there's no problem. Yes. No, of course, it was. You can subscribe to it. Many libraries had it. You can buy it from obviously on. Well, listen, as I said, 20 million copies a month. Obviously, they didn't do it for sheer to hide it from some. No, that was approved. That was served the purpose of the government. So,
but there were other periodicals that were not government sanctioned of that kind. No.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
They were either organs, instruments of the local government. Let's say they could be instrument of the Ukrainian Central Party Committee, or Odessa, since I come from Odessa. Odessa had two newspapers. One is in Russian language, what's called Znamya Kommunizma, the banner of communism, which obviously was an organ of the local, it had local news and by the local, controlled by the local party committee. So that was that. Yeah, and also I did mention to you that actually Crocodile had brothers and sisters in many other republics. It was, I know that it was in Armenia, it was in Georgia, it was also in Tatar, even an autonomic republic. And I published some pieces in Chayan, it was in Russian, it's like a Scorpio. So that was obviously a tool, yeah, perits in Ukraine, it was called perit, pepper. So obviously they gave different names of it, but it was the same kind of, and the nature of the same kind of a satire controlled by the state and pointed.
But not the same material translated for other republics.
No. Everything was, it was not translated from Crocodile. No, their own. They had their own correspondent, right. Their own language, but from point of view of political targets, it would be the same. They would be not different. It was unified for the whole country. Yeah.
You just mentioned Odessa again. So, and during your talk, you said you could explain a little bit more why Odessa is such a famous humor capital.
That's a good. First of all, the way that Odessa was built. Odessa was built to begin with as a center. For when? The end of 18th century, Catherine the Great decided that now when Russia has exit to the warm waters of the Black Sea, she created, she felt that there is a need for a port that was, by the way, the name of Odessa comes from Odessos. It was ancient Greek kind of a settlement there. And why Odessa? Because of the feminine, in Russian language, as you know, Odessa means it's a feminine word. Catherine the Great, the empress of Russia. That's obviously why Odessa. So, and she invited from all over the Pale settlement of Jews to help with the sale of grain, because they had some experience of it. And many from all over Pale of settlement, Jews came to Odessa for that, and they found it tremendously much more free and with much more opportunities than these small little shtetls in which poverty was absolutely horrific. And besides then, it became a melting pot of many nationalities because there were Greeks and Bulgarians, besides, of course, Ukrainians, Russians, Georgians, and so on. It was at one point Italians. At one point, by the way, and the city itself was built by French architects. What Catherine the Great did, she invited French architect who ran from French Revolution. And if you see the central, I may, if you'd mind, I wanted to show you parts of that, of the city that you understand what I'm talking about. Like I want to go again, share screen and probably go to a different, if you give me a moment. Okay, let me see. Let me see if I would like to show you this. That's important. Yeah, let me see. Okay, this one. Okay, here it is, Odessa, Ukraine. Okay, so this is the Odessa, right on the tip of the Black Sea. And this is the, if any of you saw the Bronenosis Potemkin, means the battleship Potemkin, this is the stair of the battleship Potemkin. And this is the top, on the top, there's a monument to the, one of the first mayors of Odessa, Duke de Richelieu, as you understand, totally not Russian, not Ukrainian, not any, he was a Frenchman who created. And this is Odessa Opera Theater, who when I came, when I immigrated to Vienna, I just saw it was almost a copy of the Viennese Opera Theater. So the whole central city was built by, when I first time came to Paris, I felt, oh, I saw it all in Odessa, because the same architects built the city. So it's enough to quote Mark Twain, who came to Odessa. In his book, Innocents Abroad, he describes his impression when he came to Odessa. He said, I couldn't believe it. The way we looked down the street, up the street, and it was all America. It was nothing to do with Russia. And obviously what he wanted to say probably is it's New York. It's, again, this sense of melting pot of nationalities, okay? And enough to say, Odessa soon became, at the end of 19th century, it was 1/3 the population of Odessa were Jews. So Sholem Aleichem was working there. The Mendel Mochen Sforim, another Yiddish writer, was working there. Bialik, the great Yiddish poet, was there. And then later on, Odessa became the center of Jewish theater. Enough to say that the daughter of two Odessa actors, then when they immigrated to America, her name is Stella Adler. Anyone who is familiar with the with the world of teaching acting knows that she was a teacher to biggest star in America, Robert De Niro, Judy Garland, you name it. So that was Odessa. And so therefore, but the question comes back to humor. Why humor? First of all, because of the multinational kind of a environment, humor kind of ameliorated the border lines between different ethnic groups. In other words, instead of saying somebody that I really don't like you and provoke a fight, you can use irony. For example, in Odessa would say, first I will tell in Russian, "Вы мне начинаете нравиться," means I began to like you, which means the completely opposite, means whatever you say, it's so outrageous. You see, that's the way to approach it. So that kind of a humor became part of the modus operandi for people who lived in Odessa. And then it was even, I think in Soviet time was a joke that where all these Soviet underground jokes were produced in Odessa. And needless to say, of course, the reputation of the native land of Ilfin Petrov, the author of the 12 Chairs, a famous novel that became like a cult, had a cult following. So in other words, from that time on, and then later on, if somebody knows already at the late Soviet and post-Soviet time, Zhvanetsky, the stand-up comedian and the writer, comic writer, was there. So in other words, Odessa became kind of a place that the reputation was alone. So in other words, when I was growing up, I never was a funny man. I never tried to make anybody laugh. And that's why it was such a surprise when this the editor in the newspaper heard my Russian Odessa accent. He said, "Oh, come on, you не морочите голову, напишите, write satire." I mean, it was assumed. And it is true, because when you grew up there, you have a feel for that kind of a humor, it was no other way of talking with strangers, just by approaching. I may even say something that humor, I think, somewhere I read that for couples coming in America, couples coming to consultation, they have some problems. One of the first questions the psychotherapist asks, do you joke together? If they say no, trouble. In other words, jokes allow you to say something and not really hit hard. That's one of the explanation of it. All right. I hope I answer your question.
Yes. Yeah. It opens up a whole other question about Jewish humor, but we don't need to talk about that today.
Right.
The relationship between Jewish humor and Soviet and Russian humor. But as you said, you can look at the final chapter of Taking Penguins to the Movies for your thoughts on that.
A separate chapter about this as well. Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions? You can pop them in the chat or just speak up. You can unmute yourself. No?
Hi, could I ask a question? My name is Irina, and I'm old enough to have been reader of Crocodile и Литературная газета. So I was about 7 when you emigrated. And I remember I was a very avid reader at the time. And I was reading through the bundles of these Crocodile at libraries in my, summer holidays, during my school summer holidays. And also my family was a subscriber to Literatурная газета. And I remember it very clearly that I was never bothering, well, most of the kind of publications in the Crocodile и Литературная газета 12 стульев, obviously they were satire, because otherwise they would not be let into press. But what I was reading was actually the scraps of humor that made their way into these kind of volumes of satire. So the satire itself was not particularly interesting because, but that was the only way these publications could actually survive. But I remember that one of the pages, I understand, one of the last pages of Crocodile were particularly interesting because they printed some scraps of foreign humor, some anecdotes, some caricatures, and the same holds for.
I don't hear you well.
Oh, sorry.
Your voice is disappearing. I don't hear well.
Censura.
Yes.
Irina, are you still there?
Her voice disappeared somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, her microphone.
Oh, it's obviously not KGB, as I say.
Yeah, sorry. I think I muted myself for some reason.
Okay. Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that I read it actually. I recall reading all these Crocodiles and Literatурная газета just for the scraps of humor that made their way into these pages. I remember it was one of the last pages of Crocodile. So are my recollections correct? Because I've never came back to that. So I never bothered to read through it, from front to back. So, and the same holds for any musical, broadcasting where you were listening to a concert in some kind of hope that they will ultimately let you listen to some Beatles song or something. So that was approximately the analogy. So I was just my question is basically, are my recollections correct about CROCODILE?
Well, first of all, what year you're talking about?
So I was reading, perhaps I was reading between 1974 to maybe 1979 or 80, something like that.
So what's the question? I mean, the last pages, for example, but that's what you brought in. There was last page, they had even CROCODILE had something for sure humor. It's called "Нарочно не придумаешь."
That's right.
You cannot invent it. So what they did, they picked up some lines from newspapers. I believe it one of the American night shows. They also used this. So they used some kind of amusing quotation from published sources. The same thing was in CROCODILE. Нарочно не придумаешь. I contributed to one of them from. I don't know whether it would be funny in English at all. Because I saw, for example, in Odessa, they had a advertisement. Галстук придает законченность внешнему виду. Again, it's nothing to seem to be funny, but in Russian language, in the slang, законченный means he is beyond help. So in other words, the play that kind of almost like the joke is, you know, those who know the culture and the slang word would that actually it's just the opposite. Galstuk usually the tie is usually presenting more official view, while what makes it a joke is that because in the Russian language, if you compare it with the word "on законченный человек" means the opposite. So that's so there was a lot, or гражданам, I remember one. Гражданам с узким горлышком керосин не отпускается. What it makes it funny, it means what it means. It's really to the citizen that have very narrow
Throats.
Narrow throats. We don't give our gasoline. Seemingly stupid, right? But what the word is actually implies that if you bring a vessel that has a very narrow opening, we cannot use it. We cannot give you gasoline because our distributor. That's what in other words, play on words. In other words, trying to play on something that is implied in the text. So that was, yes, that's true. That was in "Нарочно не придумаешь" was for pure humor.
Kind of light-hearted humor there, right? So some light-hearted humor which made it more attractive to a wider audience because no one actually wanted to read the satire as such. That was my kind of childhood recollection. And probably the same holds for today. No one would like to read really some heavy satire, but unless there is some real humor in it.
Yeah, well, that's actually what is really true. That why the whole, as I mentioned, the whole thing that why people would read satire, and I myself remember why I was attracted to the genre, because as I described as a young man walking the streets of Odessa, the newspapers usually were displayed under the glass. You can read it, the whole thing. And for me, the only readable part was feuilleton, because it was elements of humor was introduced into, otherwise would be a subject I would be not interested in, but elements of humor, dialogue and things like that. That's why I fell for it, because I realized that I can at least use some of the bell letter technique while writing it. That's absolutely right. That's exactly why people would read it, for humor. Absolutely. Humor would make it readable.
Any other questions? No? Okay, well, we've been an hour and a quarter, so I just want to thank Emil for a really interesting insight into what it was like to be a satirist in the Soviet Union and what it was like to be a consumer of satire or humor, as we've just sort of distinguished those two in the Soviet period. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming. And your book is published by University of Wisconsin Press, is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Right. So If anybody wants to get a copy of the book, you can find it. And if you have trouble finding it, just drop us a line at CEAS and we'll tell you where you can find it. So thank you very much and good evening to everyone. And good afternoon to Emil and others in,
Thank you.
in different time zones.
Thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed
It was a
our
pleasure.
report.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Seth.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.